Thinking, Fast and Slow explains how the human mind works and why people often make irrational decisions without realizing it. Daniel Kahneman divides human thinking into two systems. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, and instinctive. It helps people react quickly and make snap judgments. It works without effort and constantly runs in the background. System 2 is slow, analytical, logical, and effortful. It activates when people solve difficult problems, make calculations, analyze situations carefully, or think critically. Most of the time, humans believe they're using logic, but in reality, many decisions are made automatically by System 1 and only later justified by System 2. System 1 is useful because it allows humans to survive and function efficiently. It recognizes faces, understands simple language, senses danger, and creates quick impressions instantly. But because it relies on shortcuts and patterns, it also creates many mistakes called cognitive biases. System 2 can correct these errors, but it requires mental energy, concentration, and effort. Since the brain prefers saving energy, people often avoid deep thinking and depend too heavily on automatic judgments. Kahneman explains the idea of cognitive ease, where the brain prefers information that feels familiar, simple, and easy to process. Repeated statements feel more true simply because they are repeated often. Clear writing and familiar names appear more trustworthy. When the brain feels comfortable, people become less skeptical and more likely to believe information without checking it carefully. Difficult thinking creates cognitive strain, which forces System 2 to become active and more alert. The book explains that the human brain constantly forms associations. One idea automatically triggers related thoughts, emotions, and memories. Small influences in the environment can unconsciously shape behavior, a concept called priming. Even subtle words, images, or experiences can affect how people act later without them realizing it. Kahneman argues that much human behavior is influenced by hidden psychological mechanisms rather than fully conscious reasoning. Humans use heuristics, which are mental shortcuts that simplify decision-making. These shortcuts help people act quickly, but also create predictable errors. One example is substitution, where the brain replaces a difficult question with an easier one. Instead of asking whether someone is truly competent, people may simply ask themselves whether they personally like that person. The brain quietly substitutes hard questions with simpler emotional judgments. The halo effect is another bias where one positive quality shapes the overall impression of someone. Attractive or confident people are often assumed to be intelligent or capable even without evidence. Confirmation bias causes people to search for information that supports their existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. This is common in politics, relationships, social media, and investing. People rarely seek objective truth. They usually seek reinforcement for what they already believe. Kahneman introduces the idea called "what you see is all there is." Humans build stories and conclusions from limited information while acting as if the information is complete. The mind dislikes uncertainty and quickly creates coherent narratives even when important facts are missing. This leads to overconfidence. People consistently overestimate their knowledge, abilities, and predictions. Experts often sound certain about the future despite poor prediction accuracy. The planning fallacy explains why humans underestimate the time, cost, and difficulty of projects. Whether building companies, studying for exams, or pursuing fitness goals, people imagine ideal scenarios instead of realistic obstacles. The anchoring effect shows that first impressions or initial numbers strongly influence later judgments. For example, the first price in a negotiation affects all future expectations, even if the number is random. The availability heuristic explains that people judge probability based on how easily examples come to mind. Dramatic events like airplane crashes or shark attacks feel common because they receive heavy media attention, even though statistically they are rare. Emotional memories distort perception of reality. Another shortcut called representativeness causes people to judge based on stereotypes rather than actual probability. If someone appears intellectual and quiet, people may assume they're a librarian, even though statistically there are far more farmers than librarians. The book explains regression to the mean, where extreme performances naturally move closer to average over time. People often misunderstand this and falsely attribute natural improvement or decline to punishment, reward, or motivation. Humans also suffer from hindsight bias, where past events appear obvious after they happen. After major events like economic crashes, people claim the warning signs were clear even though uncertainty existed beforehand. Kahneman argues that intuition works best only in environments with stable patterns and rapid feedback. Chess masters, athletes, and firefighters can develop strong intuition because they repeatedly encounter similar situations. But in unpredictable fields like stock markets, politics, and economics, intuition is often unreliable. Yet society still rewards confident experts even when their predictions repeatedly fail. Humans naturally possess optimism bias. They expect positive outcomes and underestimate risks. This optimism drives entrepreneurship, innovation, and ambition, but also causes unrealistic planning and financial mistakes. Kahneman suggests using the outside view to make better predictions. Instead of imagining how successful a project will be, people should study how similar projects performed statistically in the past. One of the book's most important ideas is prospect theory. Humans do not evaluate gains and losses objectively. Losses affect emotions more strongly than equivalent gains. Losing money hurts more than gaining the same amount feels good. This concept is called loss aversion. Because of loss aversion, investors hold losing stocks too long, people fear change, and individuals become emotionally attached to avoiding losses. The endowment effect explains that people value things more simply because they own them. Ownership changes emotional perception. Framing effects show that wording influences decisions. People respond differently to 90% survival rate versus 10% death rate, even though both statements mean the same thing. Human choices are shaped heavily by emotional presentation rather than pure logic. When facing gains, people usually avoid risk and prefer certainty. But when facing losses, they often become risk-seeking and gamble aggressively to recover what they lost. This explains many financial and emotional decisions. The sunk cost fallacy causes people to continue failing situations because they already invested time, money, or emotion into them. Instead of focusing on future outcomes, they become trapped by past investment. Kahneman later explains that humans have two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives moment by moment and feels pleasure or pain in real time. The remembering self creates stories about experiences afterward. Most future decisions are controlled by the remembering self, not the experiencing self. People judge experiences mostly based on emotional peaks and endings, a concept called the peak-end rule. A single terrible ending can ruin the memory of an otherwise wonderful experience. Humans also display duration neglect, where the length of an experience matters less than emotional intensity. Kahneman distinguishes between living happily and remembering happiness. Money improves well-being up to a certain level, especially when it removes stress and insecurity. But beyond that point, deeper happiness depends more on relationships, meaning, health, and purpose. The central message of the book is that humans are not perfectly rational beings. Most thinking happens automatically through emotional reactions, shortcuts, associations, and biases. Fast thinking helps humans survive and function efficiently, but also creates systematic errors. Slow thinking can improve judgment, but it requires conscious effort and discipline. Understanding cognitive biases allows people to make better decisions in business, investing, relationships, learning, and everyday life. The book ultimately shows that the human mind evolved for speed and survival rather than perfect truth or logic.